Observing the planet, the micro effect.
www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls the string.
Well, good morning. It is a brand new year, 2019, and welcome to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Today we will have a program that will kick off the new year, and we will be discussing a subject I think that's important to everyone, and that is, will this be a year of hope and renewal, or will it be a year of destruction of our constitutional Republican form of government? And I believe that it will be a year of hope and renewal. And I have a couple of guests today that will be talking about that very subject. William Jasper, Bill Jasper, he is the senior editor of the New American magazine, and Bill has been talking about this and writing about this for the last number of months in the New American, because there is a push worldwide to take our freedoms back. There is a push worldwide to end this globalist nightmare called the New World Order that is pushing us into a one-world communist, socialist, one-world government. And I think we really need to make 2019 the year that we take not only our nation back, but we take our world back. And the only way we can do that is if we start to get off the couch and we start to do the things that are necessary for a free people to exist. And that is be involved, participate, do what's necessary to take care of business and bring us back to the constitutional republic that our founders envisioned. Bill, welcome to the radio program. And I know you've got lots to talk about. We're having a little bit of a problem to kick off the new year. We're running into a little bit of our board this fine sunny morning in January. But Bill, is that you? And welcome to the radio program.
Yes, I got cut off for a moment, but I'm back.
Hi, Bill. It's Mark Sutherland from London. How are you?
Well, doing very well. Very good. Glad to be on with you.
Well, I'm extremely honoured to be on with you. I've just got your 1992 book in front of me.
Oh, excellent. Okay, yes, it's out of print now.
Well, sorry. Wishing you guys every happy New Year and every blessing for 2019.
Well, thank you, and the same to you.
Thank you.
Well, Mark, and
Hi, Dan.
I had
Hi, Dan.
started the program. We're running into a little bit of a technical glitch here, but start the program. I want Bill to kind of tell us some of the things that he sees happening in around the world, and certainly then, Mark, will have you fill in some of the blanks on the European and the British side of the nation. But Bill, tell our listeners some of the things that you see happening worldwide that gives us the indication that finally people are starting to wake up to the reality of what the New World Order really is.
Well, there are very many encouraging signs, and for those of us who've been in this battle, like yourself, myself, and Mr. Sutherland, for many years, we can say it's about time, because it looked like there was simply not enough awakening going on around the world to what has been happening, and in the meantime, this new world order is planned by elites to create a world government to destroy national sovereignty and to basically take over control of all of the institutions of power in the world. Seem to be proceeding apace with very little opposition. And in the last couple of years, though, we've seen a huge pushback all over the world, particularly in Europe. We saw it first in England with the Brexit vote in 2016, in June of 2016, where the people of Britain voted to get out of the European Union. And we'll be coming back to that, I'm sure, talking a great deal about that, because this is a huge development, and we see in the last few months particularly all of the deception and lies and stealth and deceit that has been used by the media, the globalist elites overall around the world, and in Europe and in England, in both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, as well as the Prime Minister, to sabotage the Brexit and make sure that Britain doesn't get out of it, because the European Union, it was one of the European Union was the major political economic development to come out of World War II. The other big one being, of course, the United Nations and the UN-related institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. All of these institutions were created to concentrate political and economic power in the hands of an unelected, unaccountable elite. And the European Union was the first major step in bringing about that economic, political integration and the destruction of national sovereignty in the most crucial part of the world, Europe. And it had proceeded apace with always moving in that direction of an ever closer union, as I said, with more political and economic integration, until 2016, when the British people gave it its first big setback. Actually, there had been a couple of other setbacks in French and Dutch referendum against approving the European Constitution, but they hadn't withdrawn from the EU as the British people voted in 2016. So that was one major thing, which of course happened in June, and then in November, Donald Trump was elected. And Donald Trump is still a mystery. Many of us are not exactly sure where he's going to come down on any particular issue. Many of us were concerned very early on that this might be another big drama where he really perhaps wasn't what he claimed to be. But he has done a number of things that have been unprecedented in setting back the globalist plans for world government, and he has heightened the push around the world for nationalism, that is, taking back national sovereignty from international groups and institutions. And we've seen that now with the Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, particularly in Europe. with now the nationalist movements in Germany, in Italy, in Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, Poland, and a lot of this is motivated by the financial and regulatory and taxing and other legislative controls that the European Commission has been exercising out of Brussels against all of these formerly independent states. But the big issue that really galvanized a lot of this opposition, both for the Brexit in Britain and in all of these other nationalist movements, was the destructive efforts by Angela Merkel and the EU to flood Europe with migrants, principally from the Muslim countries of Africa and the Middle East. And that, of course, has had a devastating impact on all of Europe, and it has finally awakened millions of Europeans to finally say, dang, we better get busy and turn this around, or we're not going to have any Europe, we're not going to have any Netherlands, we're not going to have any France, we're all going to be completely overrun. And so that has had a tremendous impact in the last couple of years. And just in the last month, in December, just a month ago, the first 2 weeks of December, there were a couple of very huge conferences taking place, which really are at the center of all of this. One being the Climate Change Summit, Global Warming Summit, which was held in Poland by the United Nations. All the nations of the world went there. Donald Trump did not go, and the U.S. did participate, but many other countries boycotted it, and that wouldn't have happened when Donald Trump announced that the U.S. was leaving the Paris Accord. He was castigated and relegated to a pariah because they said, "Oh, this is completely irresponsible, and nobody will stand with him." And so he did stand alone for a while. But now, when they had this summit in Poland, a couple dozen other countries lined up on our side, and even some of the ones that are the biggest promoters of the global warming myth and all of the proposed controls to control this non-threat have had to back off, principally being Germany with Angela Merkel. She's been forced to back off of her energy plans, her green energy plans. China, which was communist China, which was working with the quote-unquote former communist Angela Merkel on this, they were the two big ones, and of course Emmanuel Macron in France. And in fact, the people of France, right at the time of this of this conference, they were into their third week of the Yellow Vest protests and riots throughout France. And so we had three of the big climate promoters, France, Germany, and China, all backing off of their Paris commitments, and many other countries saying, well, hey, we're not going to do it either. So President Trump really needs to be given proper credit for that. That being said, as you know, we have written in the New American, we've commented many times that his announcement of withdrawal from the UN was not sufficient in our view. He should have, in our view, said, look, we're out of it completely. He didn't. He said, we'll give it 4 years. We're officially declaring that we're leaving from it, and in the agreement we have to give 4 years notice. Well, that's not true. That's that's the agreement that Barack Obama and his minions put together. But we're not bound by that. It was never ratified by the Senate and whatnot. He should have said we're out of it, because Al Gore has come out, as have many other people, and pointed out, well, it doesn't mean we're really out of it, because Trump might be replaced in the near future by 2020, perhaps, and then we can resume again. And that's the way we really have to look at it. We're not out of it completely until we get out of it. And but on the positive side, that demonstrates that by taking a stand like that, one man can make a difference. And Trump not only made a difference there, which we saw in December, but during the same week there was another major UN conference going on in Marrakesh, Morocco, and that was on migration. And it's interesting there that Trump also boycotted that, and there were even more countries, including Australia and Austria and Hungary and the Czech Republic and Poland, who also went along. I think there were about 18 countries that either didn't go or announced that they were pulling out of this global compact on migration, which we should point out, tying it into the Brexit. Theresa May, who is the Prime Minister of England, who has been saying ever since she came in as Prime Minister that even though she was against the Brexit and voted against it and worked against it, now she was going to honor it. Brexit means Brexit, and leave means leave, and she was going to honor the will of the voters. We said in the New American over and over again that would that were so, but all the evidence points in the other direction, that she's sabotaging Brexit by delay, and promise, and that's exactly what she's been doing. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, all these, the Brookings Institute, they all had articles saying this is how we can really sabotage the Brexit. It doesn't really have to end up in Britain leaving. And Theresa May has been trying to do that. And it's since I mentioned the two UN conferences, I think it's very telling that Theresa May, although she was wrapped up with all her Brexit negotiations with the EU, she didn't attend either the Migration Summit or the Climate Summit, but she, very tellingly, her government endorsed both. She endorsed the global warming Paris Accord thing, and her government was there supporting it, and the same thing with the migration. And I think that is very telling, because it shows that those are issues, particularly the migration one, that were really motive forces behind the Brexit. And while she's claiming to be for the Brexit, she's actually supporting this program, the UN Global Compact on Migration, which would devastate England and the rest of Europe. So that was
okay. Bill, that's exactly why Mark is on this program right now, because Mark is there. He's actually done a couple of films, but a pretty decent film on what Brexit was all about. And he's there, kind of boots on the ground, writing and researching about what's going on in Britain and in Europe right now. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to get the two of you together, a couple of brilliant minds that can really help to flesh out why we believe that we are turning the corner and maybe finally starting to push back against world socialism or world communism. Mark, tell our listeners and tell Bill about some of the things that you're aware of that are going on in Britain right now and also in Europe.
Dan, thank you very much. And Bill, again, just lovely to meet you. It's an absolute pleasure and a real privilege. It's not every day that I manage to speak to the man that wrote the book, The Global Tyranny, Step by Step. And I know that you say it's out of print, but I think you need to put it back in print. And what I note, and I'm not just saying this just to blow blue smoke anywhere, but what I note fascinatingly on page 241 of that book is the fact that you state in regard to the European repair program after the Second World War. And the reason why I say that is how history is rewritten, and the fact that it's viewed as the Marshall Plan, as General Marshall's plan, and of course it was not. It was Jean Monnet's plan. And you lay this out very, very clearly, absolutely brilliantly. And the fact that we are not respecting history, we are not reading facts, we are not learning things. And that kind of information is not out there massively publicly on this side of the pond, even though it is there to some extent in the book, The History of Europe and the Great Deception, written by Christopher North and Richard North and Christopher Booker, who I know. They touched on this a little bit. They named the Marshall, the sort of the CIA involvement, the CFR involvement in the Marshall Plan as some kind of sort of liberal conspiracy. But this is fact. So what is going on? Bill, you have brilliantly said it, laid it out in regard to talking about Chatham House, talking about Brookings, CFR, etc. They are not known to the British people. They're not known to us. So 17,410,752 people, with a majority of over 1 million, voted out. We, as you are both fully aware of, and all your listeners are fully aware of, we had supposedly, inverted commas, a democratic construct, democracy. That vote on June the 29th, 2016 was one of the biggest political participation in regard to numbers that our country has ever seen in recent history for many, many years. A minimum, I think it was just over 70% of the voting electorate went out and actually voted to participate. And we have seen a massive undermining. We've seen the elites. We've discovered our swamp. You've discovered Alex Newman, who I know has talked about this in regard to the shadow government. You have discovered that since President Trump has come in, and you have, through that book, go through it like a dose of sorts, as we say. And we have discovered that. We have discovered that by being in the European Union for 43 years, we have a civil service that has forgotten how to run the country. We have politicians on all parties. You've just mentioned that. And one classic is, as we go through examining this, Dan, as well, that in 1968, in 1956, there was a committee, 55-56, there was a committee set up as an action committee by Jean Monnet to bring about this this federalist state. Of course, that decision had been made in 1923 between Monnet and Salter to create the European state, this supranational government that is profoundly unelected. The people are appointed. It's a socialist construct where you would take away the democracy of each individual country, treaty by treaty away, but you would not tell that country. And of course, when it was the common market in regard to trading barriers, that's what we joined. But a committee was set up in 55-56, and in 1968 we joined that committee in London, and the principal parties within our democratic system, excuse my cynicism, within the Labour Party, within the Liberal Party, within the Conservative Party, sent 2 to 3 members of their party to that group. And they were written to, and I'm just trying to think of the individual name that actually wrote to them. They were written to. And when other people go, are you telling me that there is a sort of a Nazi construct to the European Union? Yes. I mean, Paul Anthony Taylor, an incredible guy, lays this out in regard to a video. There were plans. The whole of this is laid out on that in regard to a Nazi plan. And when we say these kind of things, we're seen as complete fruit bats. But the fact is that this committee comes together in 1968, and each individual party within the United Kingdom is prepared to sell out the sovereignty of the nation. And that's what happened. And what struck me a few weeks ago, and I did a Facebook Live about this, was that in 1968, without asking the people, we then changed our coinage to decimalization, which is the European coinage. And we changed our coinage literally overnight. There was a committee put forward by Harold Wilson, then as the Labour Party, to bring this about. So we were being set up. It was a long game from 1955. So where are we at now? You are absolutely right. We voted on June the 29th to leave in 2016. And Mrs. May, all of them, because at the end of the day, she is a wonderful sort of head girl of a private school, but she can't make policy and she doesn't know how to lead. And we have discovered the root of this, again, with our shadow government. There's a civil servant called Ollie Robbins who has been doing negotiation, and Mrs. May led a very, very Freudian slip the other day in regard to a select committee inside the UK. She said the negotiations on behalf of the European Union to the UK. She has been behaving as if she's negotiating on part of the European Union on how the UK will leave. Well, the deal that she came out with makes us, as you are fully aware, the 585 report that come out, the agreement, makes us a complete vassal state. We would have to stay in there until 2020. We would have to pay £39 billion to the EU. We contribute roughly £13 billion a year, and we then get £4 billion of that back in subsidies to hand out. So we would then be paying them for 4 years, right? So actually it's leaving in name only. And the fact that we are at such a crisis, because we are bordering on, politically we are involved in a civil war. And as you know, politics is supposed to be where we exercise disagreement without drawing weapons. And you have a second amendment for a particular reason. We don't have that, even though the right to bear arms in regard to us, I think the last period of that was 1924-25. And under Magna Carta, our Bill of Rights, it's as though that was forgotten when we joined in 1973. So we have this huge fight. And I believe, fundamentally, that on the 29th of March, we will be leaving without a deal. Now, Bill, you've already raised this point. With what's going on with the Gilets jaunes, with the green, yellow vest, high-vis movement, which is spreading, it's been the 7th weekend of protests within France. Even yesterday, I hear that they were trying to get into Macron's holiday home on the Riviera. Macron, this complete and utter construct, to me, of the new world order, of inventing a political party, coming from nowhere. A man at the age of 16 then was groomed and eventually married his teacher that's 10 years older or 8 years older than him. I'm not making any of that up. People can go and research that. Someone else who was in banking, I've forgotten whether he worked for Goldman Sachs or not, or the Rothschilds, but involved in banking, comes from nowhere. And people have had enough. So the point that we are reaching is the EU going to collapse and leave us before we leave it? And it was an incredible miracle. I mean, David Cameron, when he gave the option for us to have a referendum, he didn't have to do that. But on the one hand, he had no option. In 2010, he was relieved, I think, that he didn't get a majority within the House of Commons to form, inverted commas, a conservative government. And I would say to you, and I would say to your listeners, I've said it publicly, when you get very confused about, is Mrs. May a conservative? And I would turn around and say to you, no, I believe she's a socialist construct in a blue coat. And I would then break that down, because she seems to be for every single progressive thing going, right? She swallows that up. So when Cameron got a hung parliament, put in Nick Clegg, the Liberal leader at that time, as the Deputy Prime Minister, and then in 2015, then won the election with a majority. He was shocked, I believe, and he was also shocked because the movements that led up to that point, pushed by recently, of course, in recent times by Nigel Farage, the UK Independent Party, etc., and others, and the Bruges Group, and other people that had been fighting to get us out of the European Union since Margaret Thatcher's Bruges speech, saying no, Mr. Delors, suddenly saw their opportunity. And there is no doubt about it that David Cameron et al. And everyone did not expect to lose it. They didn't expect to lose that. And I, sitting here as I don't apologize for this, as a Bible-believing Christian, passionately believe that it was a huge answer to prayer. A massive principality was brought down, but that principality has also been fighting back. And the last point, Dan, now I'd just like to make, which is also fascinating along those points, is that the wall came down in 1989, and discussing Gorbachev and what he was really about and what he was not really about, and the sort of smoke and mirrors there is another subject. But that principality, to me, spiritually, communism moved dramatically, and again, Bill raises this in his book, because in 1988, Jean Monnet, the founding father of the European Union, actually died. And I find that really interesting. When that happens, the wall comes down in 1989, and that communist socialist construct begins to tighten up even more. So where are we at? As I say, we are leaving, and a lot of people within London, within other Remainer countries, within Remainer sort of sections of our society, have been fighting for that not to happen, and we will be fine. But it's all about control. It's been about the fact that the elites, the globalists who are involved in our own nation, have been deliberately managing a decline of this nation in all aspects since 1955. Is that a bit of a summary, Dan?
Yeah, I really think that is a really good point, and your comments about how all this is built one step after another is right on the money, because this has been happening since really the turn of the 19th century, or the 20th century especially. But it's been happening really for a very, very long time. And these things have been put in place step by step, piece by piece, in a way that most average people around the world, certainly average Americans, don't see how this whole process has really evolved, because it's happened so subtly. Bill, you've written about a lot of these things that we're seeing happen right now, and as Mark says, your books go back 26 years, and really they started to happen, I know, about the time that the Agenda 21, the climate accord in Rio de Janeiro, those are the timing of when things really started to happen in a big way. Tell our listeners how the Birch Society and how the New American Magazine have really tried to make Americans and people around the world aware of this whole process and how it's happening step by step.
Sure, and I will have some questions for Mark too, because it's so fascinating all he had to say about the development there in Britain, and I have a number of questions for him about some of the things that are going on there now. But to your question, yes, I have to say that I benefited greatly from so many people that went before me who were writing for, before the New American Magazine was created, it was a monthly journal called American Opinion, and then a weekly news magazine called The Review of the News. And I was privileged to write for both of those. American Opinion began back in the late 1950s with the founding of the John Birch Society by Robert Welch. And back at that time, the Birch Society was quite a lonely voice in pointing out that the United Nations was not this wonderful humanitarian organization to preserve world peace, etc., that we were told in our textbooks, but that it was an effort started from the very beginning, even before the UN founding conference in San Francisco in 1945, which was presided over by Soviet agent Alger Hiss, and all of the people, communists and Council on Foreign Relations members, whom he had appointed as the staff members at this founding conference of the UN. And so I had the background of G. Edward Griffin and Susan Huck and Alan Stang and Gary Allen and many other people who had done, Hilaire de Berrier, who had done the earlier research, and I benefited from them both personally, knowing them and working with them and for them, doing research for them. But in 1992, it was a big breakthrough year in that this was one of the biggest UN summits, the consequences of which we are still feeling enormous repercussions from. And the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro was a huge eye-opener for me. I had already been a correspondent at the United Nations for a number of years, and I've been accredited there over the last 40 years, 30-something years at the United Nations. I don't go there much anymore, but I did more frequently in the past. And the UN Summit in Rio de Janeiro was really remarkable both for its size. It was the largest conference ever at that time, over 30,000 different delegates and participants, and another 20 or 30,000 reporters from all over the world. I was virtually alone there from our standpoint. All the rest of the New York Times and AP and everybody was writing about how wonderful and glorious this was, and they were celebrating Fidel Castro and Gorbachev and Maurice Strong and all the rest of the globalist and communist elites who were meeting there. And it looked pretty hopeless at that time, as if we were foolish people trying to brush back the tide. But those out of that summit came a number of major initiatives, of course. There was the ozone depletion treaty, the deforestation treaty, the Agenda 21, the global warming treaty, and a number of others which subsequently took center stage at various times, like the International Criminal Court, the Law of the Sea Treaty, etc. But that big conference there initiated a number of things which we're still feeling. Of course, the Paris Accords and this latest summit in Poland all came out of the Rio Earth Summit. And they decided, going into it, that, there's nothing that affords greater control over all of humanity than claiming control over all the environment. And how do you do that? You have to have global threats which you can make into credible claims of the need for global regulation and control. And that's what they did with all of these. First with the Montreal Protocol of the ozone depletion, and then the next major one being the global warming, which has taken over as the premier plan for regulating all of human activity. And of course, Agenda 21 goes even beyond that, because it incorporates all of the climate as well as every other supposed and real environmental threat. And so it looked for a long time. For instance, when I went on tour with my book in 1992, this was just after the Earth Summit, I was on a lot of radio shows, including and TV shows all over the country, and even many of the conservative ones that today, for instance, Glenn Beck, when I was on his show back then, he said, "Oh, Mr. Jasper, aren't you getting a little bit flustered about this?" He says, "United Nations folks, they always bloviate about everything, but really nobody takes them seriously. You know, this isn't gonna happen." He was talking about the global warming and Agenda 21, and that was kind of the reaction that I got from a lot of people, that you're getting way concerned about something that's never really going to eventuate. And of course, a lot of them changed their tune as it became more and more evident that this was very serious. And so I point that out to show that, yes, for a long time, when one starts sounding the alarm about something, one gets treated as a crazy person. But we have to keep on sounding the alarm, and soon it becomes evident enough that other people realize that it's true and join in and start to fight. And so now we see, this is particularly opportune point to bring up another very encouraging thing, is that this summit took place in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And of course we have now in Brazil the new prime minister there, who's called the Trump of the tropics, Jair Bolsonaro, and we've been following him quite a bit, and it appears that he's genuine, that he's the real thing. He's undoing a lot of the evils, the socialist Marxist evils that his predecessors have fastened on Brazil. And not only that, but Luna and the woman that followed him, all of a sudden the name is evading me. They were totally Marxist and were working closely with China, Russia, and South Africa, the BRICS countries. And Bolsonaro is reversing a lot of that. And that's a big thing, because they're the biggest economy in Latin America and biggest, most populous country. And so that's something that people couldn't foresee, couldn't imagine a few years ago, even a few months ago. And so that is encouraging. We still have a long way to go, because we have allowed the globalists, the one-worlders, the socialists, to take control of so much of our economy and to be able to fund so many of their operations and their NGOs and their activist organizations all over the world with our tax money and with their tax-exempt money, that it's going to be a real fight to extricate ourselves from here. So we can't be too exuberant with every little victory that we have, but at the same time we need to take proper encouragement from everything that we do and press on to do even more.
You're right, Bill. And one of the things that's come out of the last 2 years of the Trump administration and the Brexit vote and some of the other things that have been happening is that we really are finally starting to have a bit of a voice. Even though we're in the backwater, we're in the far and away the minority as far as outspoken people who are bringing this subject up. I think we're actually in the majority when it comes to people who want freedom worldwide.
Yes, and I was going to ask Mark, over the weekend, a number of the British press were pointing out that Theresa May still doesn't have the votes she needs to pass her deal, And so the strategy now is, since I guess they were supposed to vote on the 14th or something like that, and they're saying in the Guardian and the Observer, etc., that she doesn't have the votes, and so they're going to try to delay the March 29th date and press back the Article 50 date, more delay. It seems to me, and I'd like you to address this, Mark, that I've written a couple of things about the Project Fear Phase 2 that you're in now, how all the media and political insiders have been for the last couple of years warning people that Brexit would be, if they follow through on it with the real Brexit, that it would be economically devastating and create all kinds of social and political turmoil, and they've really kicked that into high gear in the last couple of months with Mark Carney, the Bank of England, Goldman Sachs guy, and with everybody else hopping on that. Do you think that the Project Fear is going to have enough impact, going to scare enough British voters? And do you have over in Britain enough alternative media there, either on the internet or radio, to get out the true information on that?
Again, a wonderful question. In regard to independent media, there are a few voices, maybe not addressing some of those issues, and that, maybe it's someone like me needs to pull my finger out and do that even more. But people are trying to get the information, and you're absolutely right. We're not in Project Fear 2, we're actually in Project Fear 3, 4, and 5, I think. I think they're absolutely throwing every single thing they can at us. I mean, the classic is the Irish border bill. The fact is that an economic think tank called Stratagen, and I posted that on my Facebook page, talk about the fact that Southern Ireland they spend 50% of their GDP paying the bank loans that they have taken. 50% of their GDP. The border there is no problem, because computerization means that goods can easily cross across that border. And as you know, politically, with what's gone on in regard to Northern and Southern Ireland, it's a very, very, very emotive, etc. But this is the EU trying to come round the back of us as a nation. And as you know, that they asked, Ireland first rejected joining the EU, and then they said, look, we didn't like your vote, you need to vote again, which is how the European Union construct goes around. For those of us, and again, it seems as though I'm about to say, it seems a bit of a paradox maybe in some ways, what I'm going to say and undermine what I'm going to say, is 17,410,752 people, with a majority of over 1 million, voted out. Those people would have walked 100 miles on the day to vote out. And a lot of those people are in areas, as you know, that have seen huge industrial decline since 1973. I mean, in 1970, I remember when I was over at this West is Our West conference, talking in Montana, and I remember in last October, and I remember saying that we lost our fishing industry. And I remember some woman just shaking her head going, well, that's completely mad. You've lost a food source. Absolutely right. We sacrificed that. We've sacrificed so much. But people have known about this, who really, really want to know. And of course, the other classic is that within our education system, within our school system, and you've got exactly the same, there has been this whole cultural Marxist attack and a revision of history, and also creating the handout situation, which is we're going to rely on the government to save us, rely on the government to do this, rely on the government to do that. And I don't have to tell you guys what that means when the fact that you, with the country that you live in and the constitution that you are trying to defend. Before we voted to leave, the Thames was supposed to turn red, locusts were supposed to appear, and the whole of the sky, Chicken Little, care of David Cameron, was told that the whole thing was going to fall in. You are joking. We have seen the fact that we, rightly or wrongly, we have a principal financial centre within London, within the banking industry. That's another subject. You've mentioned that incredible man, E.G. Griffin, and the Creature from Jekyll Island book that I do have here, explaining all that. That's another story. But we are in a powerful position in regard to that. The EU has 5.4 million employees that are reliant on employment with us, with the goods that we bring in. We have 3.4 million people reliant on them. If you're telling me that the Germans are not going to keep sending their Audis over here, their BMWs over here, and all this kind of thing, or French wine, French cheese, etc., no, we're going to still be trading. But what they're worried about is, and the reason why they want the 39 billion, is because, I can't give any major facts here, but there has to be the big question that Deutsche Bank is being very much overstretched, and that they need us to finance this, otherwise we could see Deutsche Bank collapse and all this kind of thing. The fact that they would have to come in and fill any financial gap that we are then not giving to the European Union. And my own understanding of this, thanks to an amazing MP, Owen Paterson, is that we have approximately given, since 1973, 35 billion to the European Union. And we could then work that out, say of late that we've been given, 13 billion to the European Union every year. Bill, to summarise in one sense, it's up to people. That's what deeply frustrated me and has got me into trouble at times, because people do not want to know the facts. They don't want to know the facts that in 1973 we lost the sovereignty of our nation, and I can go through how, to some extent, the politicians totally and utterly colluded within that. And as you quite rightly say, Project Fear has come about. We will have no problem. Even, I think, on the top of, dare I say it, Forbes magazine is even quoted in the last day saying, that the UK is going to be a great place to invest. The guy who runs the World Trade Organization has said, no, there's no problem. They will come out of the European Union, and if they want to, then they can trade under World Trade Organization rules. Everything is there, and the issue is, it's about this. To me, this whole atmosphere of confidence, in one sense, that says we've forgotten how to run our nation because we have relied on bureaucrats to, in fact, do that. And of course, the bureaucrats have pulled the wool over our eyes in saying, you haven't lost your sovereignty. No. And let's just say this is another key thing. You were raising this. So, the whole thing of a European army, right? Before we voted out in 2016, that was raised. Oh, they want to create a European army. And David Cameron and everyone's going, no, there's not going to be a European army. Well, that European army, and you raised this in your article, the European army was all part of bringing in regard to the Lisbon Agreement, which is the Constitution, which was reset to people, which was turned down by the French and the Dutch in 2005, and then brought forward again. But if people go through these agreements, then they will see how nefarious this is to me, how the fact that it is grabbing a power. What's rather ironic about the 2009 agreement is the fact that the Article 50 was put in, which means about sovereign states being able to leave. And of course, Merkel and Macron, over the last few weeks, have been, we need a European army. Macron doing that. In fact, you can even argue that the European army has already been on the streets of Paris because, according to Reddit, if those pictures are true, that there's already an EU sort of badge or put on the side of these personnel carriers. Bringing it back to British politics, in 2014, Nick Clegg, in a debate with Nigel Farage, basically called him a complete lunatic, saying that he believes in the fact that Elvis isn't dead and that we didn't go to the moon, in regard to the fact that we're not wanting to create a European army. He said that, knowing that that is exactly what was going on. So that has been revealed. It's there, plain to be seen. It's also there to be seen as well, where you've seen Vostad within the Brussels Parliament, within Strasbourg rather, having a complete meltdown, saying that countries, and Merkel said this recently in a meeting, in a speech, saying that countries would have to give more and more and more of their sovereignty over. And we are not making any of this up, because they're coming out with this more and more and more. They're profoundly brazen about it. And Vostad recently in a speech, when he was talking about this, I mean, his behaviour was frankly bordering on completely and utterly losing it.
Mark, I'm sorry to cut in, but we need to break for a commercial break. Can both of you gentlemen join us on the other side of the break?
I'll be delighted to. Thank you.
Oh, same here.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots. This is our kickoff radio program for 2019, and we are going to be talking about the year of hope and renewal, 2019, or will it be a year of destruction? And we've had a terrific conversation thus far. Our guests today are Bill Jasper from the New American Magazine. He is the executive editor. And Mark Sutherland, who is producer of a movie called Brexit the Movie, and also has been involved in the European Union, let's say, expose of a lot of the things that are going on in Europe right now. And we're going to have a wonderful conversation, continue that, to show that, yes, I believe that we are turning the corner and that we are finally starting to expose the New World Order for exactly what it is, and that is a one-world communist, Marxist, feudalist government that will control virtually every aspect and destroy the freedoms that Americans have enjoyed for the last 230 years. Before we get further into the broadcast, however, I want to mention that a good friend of ours, a gentleman who was a true patriot, he was a guest on my radio show, I would say probably 8 to 10 times, Mr. Bob Fanning passed away on Christmas Eve, and Bob will be greatly missed because he was very, very open about exposing the financial system for what it was and how the manipulation of our whole system of government is done through the financial system. He also patriot and very involved, and Bob will miss you a great deal. I want to wish very happy New Year to his family, and let them know how much we will miss Bob Fanning, their father, brother, and really a patriarch to the freedom movement. So with that, Mark, you were about the European Union and how all these things that are going on in Britain, they sneak it in through the back door, the European Union. I want you to go ahead and finish your thoughts, and then I want to get Bill's input on how he sees the movement of freedom moving forward in the new year.
I also want to offer my condolences to Rob Fanning's family as well. So I just want to say that. Also, you blow the trumpet for me too much. I made something called Flexit the movie, the definitive guide to how to leave the EU and protect the UK economy. Brexit the movie was another far bigger thing. But thank you, Dan. I must ask you to do my PR more often. So I think if I'd just like to make one last point where it talks about this historically. There's another brilliant book that has just come out called The Noble Liar, the BBC by Robin Aitken. It's just been published a few weeks ago, and I'm looking at that now. And he raises a fascinating point that of how the elites, in regard to the BBC, and that has come out, there is no doubt about it, after the vote for us to leave in 2016, the way the BBC has, in many ways, conspired to create this negativity, to create an atmosphere that we will not be able to survive outside the European Union construct and all this kind of thing, when it's supposed to be a sort of bastion of balanced reporting. Now, to some extent, it was so challenged that it began to try part of that through the referendum, the whole referendum debate. But if we go back to 1973, there was an infamous case that happened, and this book reminds me of that, and I'd forgotten about this, which was a reporter on the BBC, also a presenter on Radio 4, which is always seen as a bit of a highbrow station on this side of the pond. And as you know, the BBC is publicly funded. Or if people don't know, the BBC is publicly funded. We then have to pay, for us to watch television in this country, we have to pay a license fee to, in fact, do that. And that costs us around about £150 a year, translated, say, $165, or $180 a year for the privilege of watching television. And we pay for that. We then pay for this huge monolith. And a gentleman called Jack Domanio, before going up to 1973, was a huge name in regard to Radio 4. And the group, the elites that wanted us to join the European Union, then had a word with, I think, the director of radio at that time, I think a gentleman called Trethorn, and said that, could you get rid of this man because of his views, which are very anti-European, us joining the EU and all this kind of thing. And it's that classic book, none dare call it conspiracy. It is a total and utter conspiracy because it's true. It's true. And when we get called a conspiracy theorist, we're called that to shut the debate down. So this history Dan, Bill, of this manipulation of various of various people, of particularly, say, by the BBC, that would have never been raised. You could have said that the whole Jack D'Amanio case, it would have been brilliant to actually discuss that in 2016. And just finally, when you do a study of what the panelists that appear on one of our biggest sort of political programs called Question Time, and that you find that a big percentage of those panelists that appear on that show are pro us remaining in the EU compared to other people who want to leave. That, you know, you could say that only 20 to 29% of people that want to leave were actually on that program. So it is all geared to a particular voice, and the parallels between us and what happened in the 2016 presidential election and the manipulation of the press is absolutely huge, because it is exactly the same, Dan.
Yes, we've seen that over and over again. Of course, on the college campuses, they've done interviews and to find out what the composition of college professors that are teaching our young people, and it's overwhelmingly liberal. It's overwhelmingly socialistic in the viewpoint of the college professors. And right now it's less than 10%, according to the latest poll I saw, less than 10% of the college professors are what would be labeled as conservatives, and the other 90+% are labeled as liberals. And how can we have a fair discussion point when, in fact, our young people are being taught socialism from the time that they start school all the way through college? Bill, we have an opportunity here to turn this world around, and you were talking about Brazil. You were talking about what's going on in Austria, France, Germany. I mean, worldwide, we're seeing a transfer of, let's say, the power base away from the one-worlders, and we're seeing huge failures in the countries where communism and socialism has really had a tremendous foothold for a very long time. I've had a guest on my radio show a number of times, Harry Booyens from South Africa. South Africa is a perfect example of how we turn an entire government in an entire country over to communists, and how dismally they control the country and how huge their failures are. And South Africa has dropped from being number 14 in GDP in the world back in the mid-70s to now somewhere around 46 or 47th in income. And that's happened really since the advent of the takeover of the South African communists. Tell our listeners how you see this movement working worldwide and how you see these failures as finally coming to light.
Well, yes, there are a number of things. Of course, before South Africa is descending into the abyss, both economically as well as it's been given very little international press, where the actual slaughter is increasing, and you have many of these communist leaders of South Africa calling for extermination of the remaining white population there. Totally racist, genocidal proclamations coming from some of these political leaders there. And of course, this was all predictable. It happened just previous to that in Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe. And of course, it went at that time. Robert Mugabe was being promoted during the Carter administration, just as the ANC was being promoted in South Africa by Zbigniew Brzezinski and all of the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission folks in the Carter administration, who at the same time were overthrowing the Shah of Iran, overthrowing Somoza in Nicaragua, and replacing them with communist regimes. And so all of this goes back, quite a ways. It wasn't just Jimmy Carter, and it wasn't just Bill Clinton, and it wasn't just George Bush. What we see in all of these administrations, and we even see it in our current administration to a lesser degree, is the stranglehold which a foreign policy elite and economic elite achieved in our government, and refer principally to the Council on Foreign Relations here in the United States, which now has affiliates in over 30 countries. They have what they call the Council of Councils. So they have their little sister CFRs in other countries. Of course, they have their big sister, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, in Mark Sutherland's country there in Britain. And these have been the two principal groups, the Royal Institute and the Council on Foreign Relations, that have been masterminding most of the revolutions and the upheaval, economic, social, political, for the past century. They actually came into being following World War I. They were formally inaugurated, but they went back prior to that in the Rhodes and Milner groups that were functioning at the end of the 19th century. And so for over a century now, this is the 1919 is when they really were organized. We're here a century later, 2019, and they have successfully captured most of the major governments, and their whole plan is to create, as Cecil Rhodes, who founded the group, his biographer said, the government of the world was his single objective, and that's where he poured his immense wealth and those of his confreres into these nation-states, into regional groupings, the European Union being the premier one, and then eventually merging them into a government of the world. And so Mark just referred here this past weekend, Angela Merkel was speaking to a group, and Selwyn Duke, my colleague at the New American, wrote a story about it, which just appeared yesterday, where she said the nations of the world must, and then she kind of corrected herself in a Freudian slip, said should relinquish their national sovereignty. We must give up national sovereignty. And of course, Emmanuel Macron, just a couple of weeks ago, came out even more stridently, saying that nationalism is treason. And that's why you see all of these different nationalist groups all over Europe, in Poland, Hungary, Austria, Romania, etc. All these different nationalist groups, France, Germany, they are being called extreme nationalists or white nationalists or racist nationalists. They're trying to the powers that be in the media and the political elite, trying to demonize anyone who wants to restore or cling to any vestiges of nationalism and national sovereignty. And the key here, and this is where I'd like to ask Mark about, is are the British people and other European peoples coming to the realization that these leaders are lying to them. They actually are lying straight-facedly to them. And we have many examples of this where they have, in moments of candor, come out and made admissions against interest. For instance, the president of the European Commission Jean-Claude Juncker, who is still the president. He will be outgoing here pretty soon. But he said, and this is just a few years ago, I've quoted him a number of times, he said, well, when things get serious, you have to lie. And he was talking about the European Constitution at that time. And then he said, with regard to that, he said, well, yes, naturally, all of these accretions of power in Brussels involve losses of national sovereignty, but would I be smart to mention that in public? So we have quite a number of different examples of this where the European leaders have, usually speaking to their own private groups or in an interview with a publication that's for an elite audience, they admit that they're lying all the time. In fact, Mr. Sutherland could give us probably the official quote, but back when Britain was taken into the European Union by conservative betrayer, Prime Minister Edward Heath, Edward Heath said publicly, he said, oh, there are people who are saying there's going to be loss of national sovereignty here. That's an unfounded fear. There's nothing to that. And recently I was very gratified to see that even some liberals who were against Brexit have had enough of all of the lying and subterfuge and deception. One of my recent articles I quoted, for instance, Piers Morgan, who in many ways is an insufferable liberal left progressive, but he on an interview where he had Nigel Farage and a couple of other British members of Parliament who were against the Brexit, and I forget which one of them it was that said, oh, if the Brexit no deal goes through tomorrow, you won't be able to catch an airplane flight. And Nigel Farage was saying, no, that's a lie. And Piers Morgan said, hey, I was against Brexit. I voted against Brexit, but that's absolute nonsense. This is not going to happen. He says, I just had breakfast with the executive of one of the largest airlines, and he said, that's absolute nonsense. He says, flights will continue as normal. There won't be any major disruptions in that way. And yet this politician on his show insisted, oh, this is going to be terrible. And Nigel Farage, he got very angry. He says, we're just not going to take any more of your lies. You've been saying lying and lying and lying. And my question is really from someone who's a little closer to the pulse, the British pulse there. Is there a growing awareness that the politicians, even when they sound very convincing, like Theresa May, not that Brexit means Brexit, and all these other politicians that claim to be doing their best, is there a growing awareness that they've been subjected to an unbroken stream of lies and deceit?
I think there is an awareness, Bill. I mean, if you take it from the top, so let's start in various different sort of stratas of society. So if you take Neil Macpherson, who is a professor that used to teach at Oxford, who's Scottish, wonderful Scottish guy that teaches then, has been teaching in Harvard, etc. And he, personal friend of David Cameron, George Osborne, and he voted to remain. He is also married to that incredible woman, Hirsi Ali, and I'm sure we completely destroyed her name, the woman that is pushing against Islam. That's right. Yeah. And he personally married her. And Neil said this in an interview on the Rubin report, saying that, look, I voted to remain, but actually afterwards I've reflected on this, and to some extent saying that the way that we're being treated and all this kind of thing, this is wrong, but actually to say that, look, it's a democratic decision and we have to obey that. And that's the truth. If we don't obey, they do not go along with this democratic decision, I keep reeling that number out, then we do not have a democracy. This is what's at stake. You've laid this out when the Juncker, the man who unveils a statue to Karl Marx, in the town that he was born and all this kind of thing, and is also seems to have a problem with wandering hands at times, and also with drink. I'm not saying that anything that isn't out there. Amber Rudd, our previous Home Secretary, recently in an article on Sky was just bemoaning of how disgusting the individual is. So that on one level. Then further down, when you see independent media reports, protests outside Westminster, leave means leave, and you've got people turning around saying, I voted to remain, but actually I've changed my mind. And the reason they've changed their mind is because they start to see certain facts, but also they start to see things unfold in the fact that their own government is trying to literally shaft them, and they discover that 3/4 of the MPs in Parliament are trying to shaft them and not respect what they are actually saying. And just I slightly digress, but it illustrates another point. I recently wrote to my MP, as I'm trying to do, to my Member of Parliament to get answers. Also, it builds up evidence, so if he ever listens to this, he must really stop writing to me. But the fact is, I emailed him to say, what about the Brexit deal? Brexit means Brexit, and he says, I've been through 585 pages of it, and I think he alluded to the fact that he would be not voting for it. Good for him. Then I asked him about the UN Global Compact, and he said, well, I've written to the Foreign Office, I wait for a reply from the Foreign Office. I've been trying to find out whether we have signed up. And I have a funny feeling, I think you've touched on this, that we had signed up. May didn't go, but sends maybe someone else. I don't know. Have we signed up? Have we not? Or we seem to be in agreement with this. And that is, people we don't want that. I don't want that. So going back to that question, is there an awareness? Well, sometimes it's difficult to work out, because within the chattering classes, within certain aspects of our country, say in London or whatever, and they are Remainers, then it's going to be very, very difficult for some of those to move from that point. It's also been very brave for some people that have moved from that point. Robin Aiken, in that book, The Noble Liar, raises a very good point about our society, how things are created, sometimes within the sort of, even though we'd like to deny it, Tony Blair said that we don't have this class, that we are a classless society. But it's this whole thing of meritocracy. We all think that people are going to get to the top on their merits because they're very good, but actually it is about the school that they've gone to, their breeding. And what happens is that those people that think they have a view of the elites to rule, right, and whether they've done the common purpose training course, we might come to that either later or another day, is the fact that they find it hard to change their mind. They think, well, we're right in the first place, we're right to rule, we're right to be in charge, we cannot let the plebs and the little people make such a decision because they don't know what they're on about. Well, they do know what they're on about. I mean, we have even had letters to, I'm not sure whether, I think it was to the Times, saying, if we have a second referendum, and that's been another big push, if we have a second referendum, we need another second referendum, and we will not allow anyone over 55 to vote, because they're soon going to die off, and they're all the people that voted to leave anyway. I mean, it's this kind of thing, which is outrageous. And as you know, we've had Gina Miller, we've had court cases to try and stop us leave the EU, we've had all this George Soros-funded movements. Yes, I've said that name. That is out there. That to finally answer it, there is a disconnect. The book you wrote in 1992, you've just said it. You said it about when you go on a Glenn Beck show and maybe other shows, but you quoted Glenn Beck, who is interesting how, he then went on to look at the Federal Reserve and various things. And to say to you, don't you think all the UN is a conspiracy? The fact that over here, as I maybe sometimes individually or playing a very, very small part of trying to then say to people, look, this isn't a conspiracy, this is fact, it's a supranational government. There is a cognitive dissonance. There is a disconnect in seeing this. But actually, that disconnect is now starting to fuse a little bit together. And partly that's because of as you quite rightly said, of what is happening in Europe right now. that right now, as things begin to fall apart and collapse, people are going, well, we are an island, we have a channel, we've had that history for a period of years, for many, many years. And in 1961, Hugh Gaitskell, then, I believe, the leader of the Labour Party, chairman, and said, if we join the common market, it will be the end of 1,000 years of history. And this is how it's been twisted. And when you say those kind of things, of course, people like me and others, as soon as we voted to leave, we were then sort of given a brush of you are a bunch of right-wing bigoted racists. So people, I believe, are awakening because they're seeing some hard truths in front of them. Whether they're voicing that's going to come.
Okay, Mark, thank you. We'll pick that up on the other side of the break. Bill, I hope you'll continue to stay with us because I think we can wrap this up in the next half hour with some very positive things.
Very good.
Serving the planet. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots. This is our kickoff program for 2018, and we have had a very enlightening discussion about what is happening worldwide to expose the New World Order and how we see very positive things happening around the world that will lead to a free and certainly a better society. One of the things that I think we all recognize is that our so-called political leadership is not a bit opposed to lying to us or telling us what they want us to believe, because they really, truly don't care about what we think. They care about what they think. And that at the same time, I know political leaders, for the most part, are cowards. And for the most part, they're people who, if the trend goes the other way, if people start talking about freedom, people start talking about our Constitution, then they will step in line with that because they don't want to be outside of the so-called mainstream. And that's a human characteristic, but it's especially characteristic of political leaders. And I really think that once we start to turn this ship around, we will see things happening that will reinforce our point of view and help to maybe put a stop to this transition to the New World Order. Bill, I want to let you back into the conversation on that. Mark, I think, did a terrific job of answering that, yes, people are seeing the lies and they're starting to react accordingly.
Yes, and that's very encouraging. I kind of sense that from over on this side of the pond and trying to keep up with British press while also trying to keep up with other things happening around the world. And so it's very propitious to have someone like you, Mark, with your background and knowledge and being there on the ground. And I'm hopeful that they will be able to do it. I see that I think next week or in the next couple of weeks, there's another big propaganda thing coming with the Brexit, the Uncivil War, with this new movie with Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays Doctor Strange in the Marvel movies. He's headlining this new movie, which I think they're going to try to propagandize the British people into believing that the vote, the Brexit vote, was really masterminded by racists and mean, nasty nationalists, and so I'm hoping that the Project Fear will not succeed. And this is important because I was discussing this with Dan recently. A lot of Americans look at the Brexit issue and think, that's kind of okay, but that's over there in Britain and Europe, and it really doesn't concern us. It really does when one recognizes the importance of the European Union in this whole scheme in the post-World War II move for globalization, global government. That was a big masterstroke for the insiders pushing this. And this is where it comes back to one of the current issues where I'm very concerned about President Trump and the Trump administration, because my colleague Christian Gomez has been the main one writing for us on the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which President Trump said is going to replace NAFTA. We were very much opposed to NAFTA and warned about it back in the 90s when it was being put forward. And we wrote about it back then, saying that even both according to its structure as well as according to many of the architects from the Peterson Institute and the Council on Foreign Relations, etc., this was going to be a proto-EU for the North American continent. And of course, that is what NAFTA tried to become and succeeded to a certain extent in becoming. Now, the USMCA, U.S.-Canada-Mexico agreement that President Trump has now brought forward, actually was negotiated by Robert Lighthizer, a longtime Council on Foreign Relations member. And as Christian Gomez points out in his articles on The New American, he quotes a number of senior former Obama administration officials who said, yeah, well, that was all of our guys that were negotiating it clear back then are still in there. And so under the leadership of Robert Lighthizer and these former Obama State Department and Commerce Department, Labor Department officials, this new USMCA has been created. And it is either a case that, it's a massive document. It's very unlikely that the president has read it. However, we've given him fair warning, and unfortunately, there are not that many conservatives who are recognizing the danger here. That is growing, but a lot of them are believing, as President Trump apparently believes, or at least as he is saying, that this is going to be wonderful. It's going to remove a lot of the problems of NAFTA. But as you point out, it actually increases all of the areas which the U.S. would be subjected to international control. So it is a huge assault on national sovereignty, the same as the EU was and is. And so, Dan, this is a really important area where the Trump administration is really off base on, and hopefully we will see. I said when it was first brought out, before the president was praising it, but I said, well, I don't think that he has read it yet. But I said it is my hope that once he reads it and he gets some more input on it, that he'll fire Robert Lighthizer and dump the agreement, because it certainly goes against everything that he claims that he is for. And so this is going to be a major battle in this coming year, even here starting in January. So I urge listeners to follow us closely on thenewamerican.com, and because we're going to be doing battle on this, and we're hoping to get. There are a few other conservative and constitutionalist groups that are registering some concern about this, but unfortunately, a lot of them think that it's great, and all they have to do is actually read the document itself, or better yet, read Christian Gomez's articles on it. He links to the specific sections that are hugely problematical, and it's obvious that this is something that has to be stopped. And, one of President Trump's signature issues that now, of course, he's taking a stand on is the wall and gaining control over our borders. And that's something that we have been harping on for decades. And it seems that he is finally one political leader who seems to be taking it seriously. But if he, whatever he does on building the wall and other border controls, if he puts through the USMCA, it will eviscerate that. And so, we need to let the politicians know that we're against this. And unfortunately, at this point, as with NAFTA, it was primarily the Democrats, the liberal left Democrats, who opposed it. Not because they opposed it in principle. In other words, they weren't opposed to subjecting the United States to international controls and loss of our national sovereignty. They just didn't think it went far enough. They wanted to have more environmental and labor controls and things like that in there. And again, we're going to find that going on, happening again. And so we can't be dissuaded from opposing it simply because some of the liberals, the liberal left progressives, are opposing it also.
Well, Bill, one of the things that have come out of really the last 2 years of the Trump administration is that so many of these other groups, so many of these globalists, these socialists are so involved and so deep-seated in every aspect of our government that even though he thinks he's moving forward in a very positive way in reducing the international power, in fact, he's still got a lot of actors in place that have really been promoting this whole system for the last 100 years. And you mentioned the CFR, the Trilateral Group is another one that have literally controlled our government for, years, certainly for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. And a lot of those same people are still in place. So one of the things that we need to do with President Trump is make him aware of how deep-seated these people are, even though I'm sure he's somewhat aware of that. But then we also need to make sure that he has an opportunity to replace a lot of those advisors with his real advisors.
Well, that really has to take place, and beyond those who are the more visible secretaries and undersecretaries and assistant secretaries and deputy secretaries who are more easily identifiable as Council on Foreign Relations members, former Brookings Institution, Aspen Institute, etc. There are then thousands of the deep state bureaucracy people who have been in there for years. The Peter Strucks, the Linda Pages, the Rod Rosenstein, not just in the intelligence agencies and the Department of State, but in the EPA, in the Education Department, etc. And many of them, of course, as you know and as we've written about, actually call themselves the resistance, and they are working within to sabotage and to stop and to stifle as many of the Trump initiatives as they can. And they work hand in hand with their compatriots, many of whom were former members of the Obama administration, who have now moved over to CNN, MSNBC, Associated Press, Yahoo, who are now commentators there every day attacking President Trump and every one of his initiatives, trying to undermine him as much as they can in the public sphere as commentators in the media, but they are being fed information illegally, a lot of it classified information, by their colleagues who are still in the bureaucracy. And it's when we talk about the deep state, this is really, we're witnessing a battle on a huge scale that is taking place daily. Robert Mueller is just one part of it, but he's a very important part of this. He has been Mr. Deep State for a long time, and most of these people who, whether it's General Petraeus or John Brennan or James Clapper, any of these top intelligence, former top intelligence guys that are still working closely with their intelligence communities, or State Department folks that are now out there publicly opposing President Trump. They're working very closely with those who are still in the administration and not just within the administration, but also, as we've seen from day one, from his inauguration onward, in the federal judiciary, because we have hundreds and hundreds of left-wing ACLU, National Lawyers Guild, leftist attorneys who are now judges, and they are working very closely with their deep state bureaucrat buddies to foil and to destroy. Some of them come right out and said it. We're just going to hold. Our job is to hold things down until Trump is replaced, and then we'll resume. So that's the plan, and that's what we really have to support the president when he's taking the right course and when he's under attack, to back him up, and when he gets off base on things like the USMCA, not follow loyally behind him, but put him straight in those issues.
Could I just jump in here and give you?
Sure, Mark. We were going to ask you about the British deep state.
Well, absolutely. It's just giving you another different sort of viewpoint of how sort of the attack on America is going on in regard from a left-wing point of view. So we've seen Hillary Clinton come over here, promoting her book, What Happened? Well, what happened was you lost love, and it's about time you got over it. So that's the key thing. And there she is over here on the BBC, and various people swanning all over her. She went to some famous book festival that shall be nameless, and there she is talking about this. And amongst the left, to me, the left-wing elite on this side of the pond, and there she is going around, and there I am going in local bookshops and train stations with Comey's book all on top of the top, and I want to, just take the books and throw them all off the shelves. And then I walk past other shops, and there's a women's magazine with big, articles on Michelle Obama and all this kind of thing. The programming that is going on. So, Bill, when you were asking earlier, is people, are they divesting themselves of various things? Can they see the truth of what's happening? Yes, they can. And then for people like me, where I'm like, at times I feel I'm screaming inside going, can't you see the programming? Can't you see that you're being told to obey and all this kind of thing? And that famous John Carpenter film in the 80s that's completely gone from my memory at the moment. So you've got all this kind of thing. There is the cultural attack on your nation via our press. And of course, as you know, with the Steele dossier, and it looks like there's a report of another Russian guy that's been involved in that has just been found dead and all this conveniently and all this kind of thing. The cover-up, the not wanting to face things. But you said a really interesting thing in regard to Piers Morgan. The man we all love, the man that seems to have a definite angle on gun control in your country, hence why he had to leave, was the fact that it's exasperating him for people to go, well, hold on a minute. look, this is what people voted for. Get on with it. Get on with it. Now, our deep state, yes, the deep state of the civil service, the deep state of politicians, we've seen, like you, we've seen the professional political class. They go in to be a researcher for a member of parliament, and then before you know it, they've never done any real job. They did philosophy and or politics or economics at university. Then they go in, and then they end up standing for some easy seat within Parliament, and there you go. Then they're suddenly an MP. They've done no real job in their lives whatsoever. All of that has been exposed. But more importantly, and I have to do some more investigation into this, and there are experts who have done far more investigation on this that I need to get in touch with. When we have over here, and you've talked about the CFR and all the rest, and there's that classic thing where Hillary Clinton, once in an interview goes, oh, it's so wonderful the CFR is down the road and I can go and take my orders for them. Or Dick Cheney said, I've never revealed to the fact that I was a member of the CFR or the Trilateral Agreement when I was in Wisconsin or whatever. This basic lies. They think that we're utter idiots on both sides of the pond. Now, in 1989, there is a group called Common Purpose that was set up, which is the left-wing, to me, the left-wing equivalent of the Freemasons, and that's another subject for another day, that is set up, this sort of elite. Now, you've mentioned an interesting name in acting. You've talked about this film, which I have to say that I've missed in regard to a particular actor there, Dominic Cumberbatch, or blah-de-blah. Now, this is again another attack, elitist attack to me. They're within the chattering classes. No, this is wrong to leave Europe and all this kind of thing. Well, this gentleman, bless him, he's entitled to his opinion, and we have free speech, which is profoundly under attack. And we have our opinion, which is we wish to leave. That's it. That's what we're going to do. They're all part of this. And that's when it is a shock, because you are constantly saying there's propaganda, there's programming again, and people do not get it. And for someone like me, after a period of time, it's as though you're sort of bashing your head against a brick wall. And I'm, just playing a very, very small part. I don't have a massive sphere of influence, but I have to say things when I can, and I have to shout. It's all part of that. Now, I'm on the one hand, it may seem depressing, but on the other hand, I'm rather encouraged, because in the presidential election, I've mentioned this before, a dear friend of mine went into Portland Place, the BBC headquarters in Upper Regent Street in London. There was a massive poster of Hillary Clinton on a column, but there's no poster whatsoever, nothing in regard to Donald Trump as he was then. The whole construct from April 2016 within the press was Trump's not going to win, Trump is not going to win, Trump is not going to win, etc., etc. And it turned up louder and louder and louder. And even in radio stations where they're playing pop music, there'd be this cynical comment. It comes through all the time. And sometimes I have to ask myself, are there particular meetings where people sort of get together and say, this is what you will say, how it will go? But I also, I make no apologies for it. As a Christian, I do believe that we are involved in the biggest spiritual battle of our lifetime, and that is what is going on in regard to the New World Order, etc., etc. And I just, in a way, it's like a passing comment. But Bill, this is a compliment to you, and the fact that your book here that I have, and when I opened this, there was a piece of paper that fell out, and someone's written it. It'd be amazing if we could find out who it is. And in it, someone makes a comment. They said, the sad thing is all the people being led astray who think that they are doing what is right. And that was a piece of paper that was put in a copy of your book that I actually have here. This is the whole point. The whole apparatus is it seems so complex, it seems so against us, but that doesn't mean that we don't give up. It doesn't mean that we don't have critical thinking. It doesn't mean that we don't continue to speak out. And one of the privileges, and I would say this, one of the privileges that I have is, Dan, that you've invited me on this show. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to Bill. We are trying to educate people, which is, I feel very honoured to be able to do, and to be given this platform. And that is what we do. And we have to encourage each other. We have to reach out across the globe. And the New American has been doing that for a while, with the John Birch Society. And I'm trying to catch up on all that. I'm trying to catch up on doing my Hillsdale course and learning about the Constitution and the value of that and all that's going on. And I am very, as you know, very passionate about what's going on your side of the pond, because, Bill, you said this. Should we care about Brexit? Well, we need each other. We need each other like no other time, and we need to be reaching across the globe, which you are doing to me, to us, and vice versa. And desperately, and just one final comment, Canada desperately needs us. With what's happening there, dear friends of mine who live in Alberta in Canada are slowly pulling their hair out with what is happening there into Mr. Justin Castro Trudeau over there. It's stepping up so obviously. And
I hate to say this, Mark, Bill, we've run out of time. We need to continue this discussion at another time. I hope that you gentlemen will come back and we can do that. I want to wish our listeners a very, very happy and prosperous new year. And please, get off the couch, get involved, and start to make a difference for the world, because we can save the world if we get up and do something. Thank you, folks, and thank you, Bill and Mark, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you.
God bless.
Look forward to it.